What's up, Net Soldiers? I'm Ned Alliance, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be ranking all 12 Star Wars movies from worst to best. Now, before we begin, I have a few things I'd like to say. If you want to skip straight to my ranking, you can go ahead and do that. I'll leave a timestamp on the screen. However, I recommend you listen to what I have to say because it does ultimately impact the list itself. So if you want to skip this intro and go right to the ranking, there is a timestamp right there. Go ahead and do that. Now, for those of you who stuck around and who are cool, people who skipped, they're lame. That'll be our little secret though, of course. The last time I ranked these movies was about a year and a half ago when Solo came out in theaters. In fact, one of my previous videos is still the highest viewed Star Wars movies ranking video on YouTube. So, with the release of episode 9, I feel as though I should update it. Now, before we truly begin, I just wanted to say I honestly like every Star Wars movie, but some are just better than others. So if you disagree with my rankings, that's 100% okay. Let me know your rank in the comments below. Also, I recently reviewed all of these films in full depth. So if you'd like more insight on why I ranked these movies the way I did, I'll actually leave a link to those videos in the description below and up here on the top of your screen. And of course, as always, if you guys enjoy this video, please consider helping out the channel by liking, subscribing, and turn notifications for more. I do a bunch of videos, at least 2 to 3 a week, so maybe you'll like it, subscribe. But with all that said and out of the way, let's begin. Coming in at number 12, we have the Clone Wars movie. Since I started ranking movies, people have wanted me to rank this movie inside this video with the rest of them, and it's always the same spot every time. For this movie feels like 3 episodes of a TV show placed together to make a small little cartoon movie. And that's what it is. And that's why it's here on this list. Not attacking the Clone Wars series. The Clone Wars series is really good. But this movie is just not like a movie. So it's last on my list. At number 11, I have Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. So at one time, I actually had The Last Jedi a lot higher up on this list, for I initially thought its approach to storytelling was something that we've never seen before. However, while I have to give this film credit for trying something different, it's just not a Star Wars movie to me. The movie focuses so much on trying to subvert expectations the entire time that it forgets to actually tell a good, cohesive story. Now, I know people are expecting me to just destroy this movie right now, but I'm going to subvert your expectations and do something else. So for me, while this film doesn't work as a main saga movie, I honestly think that if this film was kind of on its own, like its own standalone film with characters that are different, and it still followed the same basic plot, I actually think this film would actually be really beloved. The issue is, the director Rian Johnson didn't seem to have the proper respect for the source material and the characters already established. I honestly believe that if Rian Johnson was given access to his own characters, his own story, his own plot, he could just make his own Star Wars movie, I think he would actually make a really good movie. The issue was, he was playing with someone else's story, and that just didn't work out well. And I said this in my Last Jedi review, but The Last Jedi feels like a part 1 to its own story, but The Last Jedi is supposed to be part 2 in the story. And the issue with that is, part 1 should be kind of like the establishment of the characters, which we saw in episode 7, Episode 8 should be kind of like them traveling to the point where they're going to be in episode 9, but the issue is that second part, which is episode 8, it feels like another origin story almost. So the characters are almost at like the exact same spot they were in episode 7. And if your characters aren't going to evolve, you're wasting your time telling a story. And if you think about it, you could actually skip this movie altogether if you wanted to. The only things you really need to know going from episode 7 to episode 9 is that Luke and Snoke are dead. And yeah, the story doesn't change. It's just rough. And like I said, while there are some decent parts in this film, from a Star Wars movie perspective, it portrays its own fans, and that's why I have it here on this list. At number 10, we have Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. So Rogue One is an interesting attempt at making a spin-off to a film while attempting to give it a reason for its existence. And while I don't think it's a bad film, I do find it kind of sluggish. I mean, I do appreciate that Disney actually felt it necessary to kind of go back and kind of explain away one of the biggest plot holes in cinema history. And that's cool that they did that. The issue is, the film is kind of forgettable for me. I mean, I'm not even kidding. This movie came out in like, what, 2016? And for like the first year after that movie came out, I actually didn't even know most of the characters' names. And I spent the majority of the movie with them. I knew Jin, I knew Cassian, I knew K2, Chirrut, and his buddy, and the pilot. And for the first year of this movie being out, I actually didn't even know Chirrut's name. I just called him the blind guy, his buddy, and the pilot. And that's what I still call his buddy and the pilot, because I don't know their names. Wait. The one guy's name is Baze. I know that. But the pilot, I'll never know his name. And even though the Vader scene is incredible, I don't think that one scene can really save an entire movie for me. Like I said, I appreciate this movie for what it is. However, it's not one of my favorites, and it's forgettable for me, so it's here on this list. At number 9, we have Solo, a Star Wars story. So I have Solo here on this list because it is a little bit better than Rogue One in my opinion. For while I'd say Rogue One is the better constructed film, Solo is just more appealing of a film for me personally. And yes, I realize this movie was just made purely for money, but I think it has a kind of charm to it. I even like the actor who played Han. Not at first, but he kind of grew on me through the film. And yes, he is a different Han than what we're used to, but this is like 10 years before A New Hope, so in 10 years, Han can definitely change into that character, so I think it's believable. Like I said, not a great movie, but it's decent for what it is, so I'm entertained, and that's pretty much the most important part about a movie. You go to the movies to be entertained, and I was entertained. At number 8, we have Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So I was going to write a completely new ranking explanation for this film, but after watching my previous ranking video to prep for this one, I realized I still feel pretty much the exact same way. So I'm just gonna play you that clip because I'm not gonna reiterate something that I already did. The rest are gonna be original rankings, but for right now I'm just gonna use this clip, so here you go.
The anthology prequel film. And you may be thinking, wait, Ned, you said Phantom Menace, not Rogue One, bro. What do you mean by an anthology prequel film, home dog? Well, let me explain. The reason I consider The Phantom Menace an anthology prequel film is because the movie itself feels like a branch off of the main Star Wars saga. It's a story, much like Rogue One, that didn't particularly need to be told. For instance, I have always said that Episode 2 should have been the real Episode 1, and then there should have actually been Episode 2 that would take place during the Clone Wars itself, and then Episode 3 would still be more or less the same. The idea being that the Clone Wars would be the main conflict in Episode 1 through 3, to mirror the main conflict in the original trilogy that was the Galactic Civil War. I would go deeper into this alternate timeline, but that is a video for another day. So going back to my main point, many of the key moments in The Phantom Menace could be explained how Rogue One's story was originally explained in A New Hope. So the main points that need to be stated could either be brought up in a conversation quick, or perhaps in a flashback, especially on the side of Count Dooku to better flesh out his character and why he turned to the dark side in the first place, just to make a more compelling villain that would last from Episode 1 to 3 to kind of mirror Vader in Episode 4 through 6. Other key moments that could have been brought up would be Anakin being found on Tatooine and having to leave his mother. Perhaps a little exposition on Qui-Gon, but it's not necessary. And maybe even a little explanation onto why the Separatists started the war in the first place. Stuff like that could have been ripped out of The Phantom Menace and placed right into Attack of the Clones. Now with that said, the film itself, besides being unneeded, was overall just kind of plain. Kind of like a pizza. And I know you guys love my analogies, so you're welcome. So on this plain pizza, you may have your cheese and your sauce in the form of scenes like pod racing and the final lightsaber duel between Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan. And you may have a pinch of garlic on top in the form of a few interesting characters and really good music. But no matter what, it's still a plain Star Wars pizza. And you eat it because, well, it's Star Wars pizza. But there's nothing really to it. And it's for all these reasons I have Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace at this spot. Also, yes, I realize I didn't acknowledge a certain Gungan, but that's because he's a perfect character, so there's nothing to complain about.
So yeah, Episode 1 definitely has its moments, but the other films are just better, so that's just the way it is. At number 7, we have Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. So The Force Awakens was a soft reboot of the Star Wars universe, essentially catering to the OG fans while pushing the prequel fans aside. Because at the time when Disney first acquired Star Wars, they thought that everyone just hated the prequels. And they eventually realized they were horribly wrong, and now they're fixing that issue. But it is something that happened, and so now they're still kind of fixing the issue that they created by doing that. But still, this film is plagued by the fact that it was built to be somewhat of a return to form type of movie. However, the issue was that Star Wars didn't need a return to form, it was always fine. So instead of taking this franchise into a direction that we've never seen before, Disney played it safe, and unfortunately it shows. To the fans, the First Order and the Resistance were just diet copies of the Empire and Rebels. Kylo was just a diet, less menacing Vader. I mean, honestly, the entire movie was just kind of like a diet version of A New Hope. So if I were to make this new trilogy, I would have taken the galaxy to the next step. What I mean by this is that the prequels had half the galaxy versus half the galaxy in the form of the Republic versus the Separatists. The original trilogy had the idea of the galaxy versus itself, like the Empire versus the Rebels. So the next level would have been galaxy versus another galaxy. So this new threat doesn't actually have to be from another actual galaxy like, the Yuzhang Vong from Legends, but it has to be something that we've never seen before, kind of raising the bar, but it doesn't. Now, while I don't love the direction this film took, for what it is, I think it's still a fun adventure, and it introduces decent enough characters, so that's why I have it here on this list. Alright, coming in at number 6, we have Star Wars Episode 2, The Attack of the Clones. So this is the first time that I actually had Attack of the Clones this far up on my list ever. In fact, there have been times, and this is the only movie I actually did it with out of the entire Star Wars franchise, where I was watching this film, and I would actually stop watching halfway through because of it just being so awful to me, I guess you could say. But after rewatching this film for my review series, I discovered that it's actually a pretty good Star Wars movie. It becomes a better movie once you are able to put yourself in Anakin's shoes. His entire life, he only had 2 women he loved, his mother and Padme. And after nearly a decade of being told to push his emotions aside, he comes face to face with Padme again, and it's clear he doesn't know really how to handle himself. Because that's one of the biggest flaws of the Jedi of the prequel trilogy, is they teach their people how to push their feelings aside instead of really understand them. And that's shown perfectly with Anakin. So shortly after revealing his love to Padme, he loses his mother, and in the span of a few days, Anakin had felt all sorts of traumatic emotions that he had never had to actually deal with, or he was never properly trained how to deal with. So when you look at the film from that type of perspective, Anakin doesn't come off like a crybaby like I used to look at him. I look at him more as a broken young man who doesn't really know who he is and lost a lot of important things to his life. And you see that. If you look at it that way, I think it's okay. Now, don't get me wrong, there are definitely a bunch of other faults with this film, but I think the main aspect always comes down to people complaining about Anakin, our main character. So if you look at it like that, I think it's okay to forgive this movie for that reason. And I think ultimately it does become a better movie because of it. Now, like I said, it doesn't make it a great movie, and I completely understand if you hate this film, but that's just how I feel. At number 5, we have Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So Episode 9 just came out, so I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will say that this film had a lot of things it had to do. It needed to tell a cohesive story, it needed to fix the issues of its previous films, and end the entire Skywalker saga on a high note. So the question is, did it succeed? Well, I think it did for the most part. It was a good adventure with these new characters that I've been wanting to see this entire time. This film also seems to have actual stakes, where I felt episodes 7 and 8 were just kind of lacking in that department. And I may get some flack for this, but I personally felt that the way they brought the Emperor back was actually pretty interesting. So that's just how I feel. Now, at the time of recording this ranking, this movie has only just come out, so only time will tell if it holds up or not. Because what I've noticed so far is it's kind of splitting the fan base. Kind of like Last Jedi did, except for The Last Jedi took a couple weeks before that started happening. This is right off the bat. So, I guess we'll see how that goes. Oh, and just an example of this, when The Last Jedi came out, I actually gave it an 8 out of 10. And now, it's on the bottom of my list. So, yeah, it can happen. At number 4, we have Star Wars Episode 6, The Return of the Jedi. So Return of the Jedi used to be my favorite of the original trilogy when I was a kid. However, upon watching it now, it is definitely the weakest of the original trilogy in my opinion. Doesn't mean it's bad, it's just not as good as Episode 4 or 5. For while Luke's plan in the beginning is a little convoluted, I think it's still an entertaining scene altogether. And of course, the ending scene with Vader, Luke, and the Emperor is just iconic. But somewhere near the middle of this film, it just kind of slows down too much for me. So, like I said in my full review for the movie, I love Ewoks, but they do get a little too much screen time, and it ends up kind of taking away interesting elements we could have seen in this film because we're so busy on this whole filler scene with Ewoks. And that's kind of unfortunate. But as I stated, the Vader and Luke fight is fantastic, especially once Anakin returns and throws his former master to his death. That scene was always great. So as I said in the beginning of this ranking, it is not a bad movie, but it definitely is the weakest out of the original trilogy, and that's why it's here on this list. Okay, coming in at number 3, we have Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. The OG Star Wars movie still holds up till this day. It's got a kind of magic to it that the other films just don't have. Now, it's not a perfect movie, and I found if you watch these films in chronological order, this film is definitely slower paced compared to Revenge of the Sith, especially when you come right off of that film. And while that's not really the fault of this movie, I do think it's something that needs to be addressed, so there you go. But nonetheless, regardless of how you feel about this movie, This film was the film that started Star Wars. Without it, we wouldn't have all the rest of the movies, so it deserves respect. And as you can tell from this video, it's still one of the best out of the ranking list, so that's great. And at number 2, we have Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Empire was a great sequel that managed to surpass the first movie in almost every way. It raised the stakes, it dove deeper into the galaxy and its many mysteries, and it gave us arguably one of the biggest twists in all of cinema. However, while it is a great film, there is a major issue with this movie that I've never heard anyone else ever complain about. So, let's do that here. Like I mentioned in my review, for the majority of the movie, Han Solo, Leia, and Chewie, their B-plot is just kind of like sidelined while Luke's A-plot takes place. It's not a massive issue, but it's still something that I have noticed, and I think people kind of overlook this film because they instantly just say Empire's the best, but they don't really consider that maybe this film might have a con. So while that entire chunk of film is just kind of filler, at least they're doing something. Now, even with this con, the film is still fantastic, and I would 100% understand if you have this on your number 1 spot. Now, at number 1, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So before I explain why Revenge of the Sith is number 1 on my list, I want to say something. Back in 2015, I made my very first ranking video where I ranked the 7 Star Wars films, and in that video, I had put Revenge of the Sith at the top of my list, and of course, this caused some controversy, because that video at the time quickly rose to be the highest viewed Star Wars ranked video on YouTube, and before then, it was all these different Star Wars ranking lists that always had Empire at number 1. So here comes my video out of nowhere, puts Empire at number 2, and puts Revenge at number 1. So you could imagine I received a lot of flack for that. However, as the years went by, I'd update my list every time a new Star Wars film would drop, but Revenge of the Sith would always remain my number 1. And the crazy thing was, every time I would update my list, I would realize I was getting more praise than flack, until eventually, like my previous ranked list, I didn't receive nearly anyone complaining about the fact that I put Revenge at number 1. Now this could be for multiple reasons, whether Star Wars fatigue is actually a thing or Disney really just doesn't know what to do with Star Wars. Regardless, I have seen a change in the heart of many Star Wars fans. Even some of the once most stubborn prequel-hating original trilogy supremacists have since come around to actually liking them a little bit. And that's interesting to me. So while I don't exactly know why the fandom has had such a drastic change in the last 5 years, probably because of the sequel trilogy, but I don't know for certain. I've been told before that my ranking videos have really had an effect on the fan base. Now, whether or not that's actually true, it doesn't really matter. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to be known as the guy who made the prequels great again, but that's not what I'm intending here. I'm trying to say, like, it's cool to see that the fan base is really just coming around to these films. And people aren't afraid to voice their opinions like in the past. And the truth is, I have a quote here I wrote, I think it's great. If one is to truly understand Star Wars, one must accept all of its aspects, not just the dogmatic narrow view of the original trilogy supremacists. Okay, and with that said, that was actually a longer tangent than I was planning on being on, but here we are. If you want to know why Revenge of the Sith is my favorite film, it probably comes down to when it came out. It came out at a time when I was like 10 or 11, and it just blew my mind. This was the movie that just made me want to love Star Wars, but also made me love film. And it's the thing that got me into Star Wars. I was always kind of a fan beforehand, but when this movie came out, I became one of the biggest fans. And without me watching that actual movie, I probably would have never did this channel, because I think my very first Star Wars video I did was on Revenge of the Sith. And part of that has to come down to the fact that I'm a massive fan of the movie, and I'm a little bit biased, but it is my ranking video, so I'm allowed to be biased. And I'm not kidding when I say that this movie was like my life. I grew my hair out to look like Anakin when I was a kid. I wanted my arm to get cut off so I could have a robotic one. I'm not kidding. I actually thought that was a logical thing. And you know, that's part of it when it comes to Star Wars. You know, a lot of us saw Star Wars when we were kids. So when we see Star Wars again when we're older, we're constantly comparing it to the first one we saw. And I don't know if that's necessarily true for everybody, but that's how it is for me. And that's why Revenge of the Sith is number 1 for me, because it is the best Star Wars movie in my opinion. But of course, that's just my opinion. What's your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. What is your most hated movie? What is your most beloved movie? Let's start a discussion down there. Maybe we can get some conversations going. What's the best trilogy in your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. Please remember to like, subscribe, and turn notifications for more videos. I would definitely appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for all the support I've been getting on my channel recently. This has reinvigorated my want to keep on doing this, and my drive has never been better. So thank you guys so much. Let's keep on doing this. Also, suggest some videos down there in the comments below. I'd like to actually do some more suggestions like I used to do in the past. So, suggest them. I might do them. And if I do, I'll give you a shout out. Okay, so this Star Wars video has gone on long enough. Guys, like I said, if you want to check out my reviews, they're in the description below. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.